Monster Hunter World Iceborne is more of the same glorious slog for everyone who's ever been taken down by a fire-breathing facsimile of a Tyrannosaurus Rex and thought, I can't wait to do that 50 times over. The franchise has always rewarded those willing to put in the hard yards, and Iceborne is no exception. It adds more of what set the base game aside from its predecessors without feeling overcrowded, even if its narrative could have used a little more work. Monster Hunter World was an exercise in refinement upon its release in early 2018. Not only did it manage to simplify a franchise-wide burgeoning quest system, but it also had a very successful stab at creating an open-world ecosystem absolutely teeming with things to do and colossal monsters who want to hunt you. Best of all, these changes never overwhelmed. The new mission and upgrade systems that were introduced were relatively straightforward to grasp, all whilst leaving room for experienced hunters to master them. Since the game's launch, the game has seen a steady drip feed of DLC content in the form of in-game events. Many of these follow the formula of transplanting something fearsome into an already familiar environment. The Witcher 3 crossover saw Lucian loom large in the ancient forest, and the Final Fantasy XIV collaboration had you running for cover when Behemoth reared its head. The design philosophy behind Monster Hunter World Iceborne takes a similar approach in implementing that sort of content, though on a larger scale. It uses touchstones in the form If you like trashing demons with katanas, we have some good news. Nioh 2 is on its way after Team Ninja's success with the original Nioh in 2017. The bad news is that, like Nioh, this new prequel will also be released on PlayStation before making its way to PC. Despite a slightly wonky PC port, I found Nioh to be a fun and fast-paced innovation on the genre we begrudgingly call the Souls-like. Nioh 2 plans to diverge further from that inspiration, with Team Ninja referring to the prequel as an evolution of Nioh. From what we know so far, there are more weapons, more skills, and lots more yokai. You won't be playing as the blue-eyed Irish samurai William this time around, as the prequel takes place long before his birth. Instead, you'll create your own character, a yokai spirit. Here's everything else we know about Nioh 2 ahead of its eventual assumed Darksiders Genesis brings a new perspective to the near-decade-old hack-and-slash series as it moves from a third-person action-adventure to a top-down Diablo-style action RPG. Ahead of the spin-off's release later this year, we set out to discover what else is new in Genesis. Below is a compilation of everything we know so far, from details on its story and gameplay to its super-limited Nephilim edition. Darksiders Genesis stars two horsemen of the Apocalypse War and Strife series veterans will remember War as the playable character in the first Darksiders. The gun-wielding Strife is playable for the first time and is described as self-interested, decisive, and quick-tempered. The story takes place before the events of Darksiders. If you backed Wasteland 3's crowdfunding attempt, today's the day it bears fruit. Inzile has created a short combat-heavy demo/alpha for people to dig into and give feedback on. If you didn't back, then you'll have to live vicariously. We met up with Inzile earlier this week to play the very same slice of Wasteland 3. It's been a long time coming, and I was excited. After all, this is the sequel to our 2014 Game of the Year, though to be fair, Wasteland 2 didn't win those accolades based on its combat. It was enjoyable, sure, resurrecting the turn-based tactics of the isometric Fallout entries, but Wasteland 2's writing did the heavier part of the lifting, carrying a somewhat rickety collection of mechanics to the top of our podium. Writing is in short supply in the Wasteland 3 demo, no surprise there. Inzile took a similar tack with the Bard's Tale IV Backer demo, a linear combat-driven dungeon crawl that was, in retrospect, barely reminiscent of the full game. It's a shame, though, as what I really want from a Wasteland 3 demo. Everyone loves a vampire, from Christopher Lee's charismatic Dracula via the insipid toothsome teens of Twilight to the sexier vampires of True Blood or The Lost Boys. There's an appeal to sleeping all day, partying all night, never growing old and never dying, yet still role-playing as an actual Vampire in a video game is something we've had few real opportunities to do. That's something Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 is hoping to change. Those of you who got the chance to play Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines on PC back in 2004 fondly remember it as an ambitious if hugely flawed vampire RPG based on a tabletop RPG. It put you in the role of a newly made vampire finding its fangs in a post-dusk Los Angeles. There was a lot to love about the game, but its ambition was marred by clumsy mechanics and the limitations of the time. But now a belated sequel looks like it will fully realize our vampire RPG fantasies. Even though it's been 15 years, fans can rest easy. Developer Hardsuit Labs has roped in original game writer Brian Mitsoda to help craft a faithful follow-up for our gameplay demo. We're placed in the shoes of Thin Blood, the name given to a weaker vampire who has just been embraced, that is, turned into a bloodsucker at this point of character creation. Mount and Blade 2 Bannerlord, like that ridiculous scene in Monty Python's Holy Grail where Sir Lancelot runs towards the cast gates without ever getting closer, has seemed on the horizon for years without mention of a real release date. As of Gamescom this year, we have one sort of it's coming to early access on Steam next year. The medieval fantasy sim is a chimera of genres, one part RPG, another management and strategy, all set in a war-torn sandbox. Starting from nothing, you can eventually establish a dynasty, traipse around the world robbing everyone, or become a famous tournament-winning knight. Despite being a bit janky, the original game was improbably ambitious and ultimately brilliant, making the wait for the sequel seem even longer. Here's everything we know about Mount and Blade 2 Bannerlord, including its Siege's large-scale combat campaign and multiplayer. If you need to pass the time until Bannerlord arrives, consider checking out our OneC Entertainment has announced that King's Bounty 2 is in development and expected out next year. It's a departure from the previously isometric cartoon fantasy series and is now a third-person, highly cinematic experience, and judging from the trailer a bit on the serious side. Give it a watch above. The original King's Bounty predates Heroes of Might and Magic and let wandering adventurers explore a bunch of fantasy realms, recruit troops and creatures, and get into turn-based tactical battles. A decade later, the series returned with King's Bounty Legend, which introduced more RPG elements, a lot of silliness, and you could marry a zombie while the tactical battles remain. King's Bounty 2 seems like another reinvention. Instead of clicking your way down paths on an isometric map, it's an open world that looks more like it belongs in a conventional RPG. You can wander around at your leisure, pick up quests, build relationships with NPCs, and wrestle with moral conundrums. There are trolls, dragons, and unliving horrors, so expect some fantastical elements, but it's definitely not as whimsical as the rest of the series. OneC says it aims A Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild sequel is coming, and it's in development right now. The Nintendo Episode 3 2019 presentation ended with a Zelda Episode 3 surprise, and though it was relatively brief, it was still one of the Episode 3 2019 games that I hadn't dared to hope for. It went without saying that another big Zelda game would come out eventually, but Nintendo came out with a big surprise by revealing what appears to be a direct sequel to Breath of the Wild. The teaser trailer shows Link and Zelda investigating some ancient subterranean ruins. They look like they belong to the sort of ancient culture that Zelda would be quite interested in studying, but they aren't. There on scholarly business and oozing corruption that looks very similar to the harmful malice that Calamity Ganon spread across the land of Hyrule, but Calamity Ganon is sealed away and all of its malice should be gone. Is this a new source of corruption, or was Ganon not as dealt with as we'd hoped? It took years and years for the first game to arrive after it was announced, but I think the Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 release date is going to be different for one sprawling reason: the map. The most impressive thing about Breath of the Wild was its huge yet detailed Square Enix's Final Fantasy VII Remake presentation during its Episode 3 2019 conference was an impressive spectacle, but it's only when you get your hands on this much-anticipated return to Midgar and Mako that everything slots into place. The development team have seemingly captured the very essence of nostalgia that is powering fans' hopes and dreams and injected it into a 21st-century action game. It's a game that plays nothing like the 1997 original but simultaneously feels just like it. Final Fantasy VII Remake is not a remake, not really, for one. Final Fantasy VII Remake is so big that the first episode requires 2 Blu-ray discs to fully capture, but it's a complete reimagining of Square's most famous JRPG, albeit one that remains slavishly faithful to the tone and world of its source material. The Episode 3 demo, split between an introduction hands-off presentation and a hands-on section, covers the majority of the first Mako reactor bombing run. Fans will find it instantly recognizable. Cyberpunk 2077 is set to be one of 2020's biggest games from the creators of The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. This epic RPG will take players to a futuristic city filled with things to do. It looks amazing, so we've compiled everything you need to know in one convenient place. CD Projekt Red has been on an absolute roll this generation. The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt was a wonderful swan song for Geralt of Rivia, while also firmly cementing itself as one of the greatest RPG adventures ever made. So the Polish studio's next project has an outrageous amount of hype behind it, and we're wrapped right up in that, with countless others taking place across a sprawling futuristic world and starring global megastar Keanu Reeves. We've seen Cyberpunk 2077 in the flesh, and it's